Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today it's a good day for weird and eerie news because, of course, there's always plenty of it. First stop is going to be at Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and first one's titled The Dark Side of Human Nature. In April 1979, Dr. Earl S. Patterson spoke of Connecticut's Meriden Public Library's Literary Lunchbox, a program that featured speakers from the book world. He was promoting his book series, Case Books from Hell, Psychiatry, and the Occult. In 1962, Dr. Patterson was appointed Assistant Superintendent of Undercliff Hospital. He had been a consultant there since 1958. Originally known as the Meriden Sanatorium, it opened in 1910, and in 1918 it was dedicated to treating children with tuberculosis, German measles, chickenpox, and smallpox. By the 1950s, it became part of the Department of Mental Health and changed its names to Undercliff Sanatorium, then Undercliff State Hospital. In 1976, it closed down. Starting in 2013, it was demolished to make way for a juvenile courthouse. The series presented by Dr. Patterson dealt with the occult relationship to his profession, which was psychiatry. And no doubt some of the cases were drawn from his years at Undercliff. It was a subject which, at that time, he was quoted as saying, quote, I spent a sleepless night before coming here. The occult is something that I don't like to dwell upon these days. When I started in 1956, I was at Connecticut Valley Hospital. I ran across some cases that were from the Middle Ages. End quote. Possession of people by supernatural entities dates back to the ancient world, where they could be seen as oracles, or epilepsy was interpreted as being touched by the gods. In the Middle Ages, it was seen as something of a darker bent, where the manifestations were proof of being under the sway of the devil. Belief in sorcery was investigated by the Inquisition, much like what happened in the 1692 witch trials overseen by the Puritans in Salem, Massachusetts. According to Dr. Patterson, the latest possession epidemic was connected to the film The Exorcist, released in theaters in 1973. He described that in his town he saw 5 cases of people who believed they were possessed. Across the country, psychiatrists saw approximately 50,000 people for the same reason. He didn't believe the reports were publicity stunt and that they were accurate. Dr. Patterson had recently finished a book composed of a 10-volume series titled Case Books from Hell, Psychiatry, and the Occult. The first to be issued was titled Possession. He found that when he first brought his book to a publisher, it wasn't accepted because, quote, it presented the darker side of what happens to people who get involved in the occult. He claimed that pushing the occult through film, books, and television was a multi-million-dollar business. According to Dr. Patterson, those who benefited from these projects didn't see the human wreckage they create. Involvement in the occult resulted in people mutilating, killing, and torturing their children or being committed to institutions after their mental stability had been damaged. He said, quote, someone connected with the Vatican once described secret satanic groups as occult playboy clubs. I don't like this attitude or handling this lightly because these clubs with secret rituals can lead to killings. End quote. Dr. Patterson specified that all cults were dangerous, as he had come across reports of murders committed by cult members. The massacre that happened in Jonestown in 1978, according to him, came as no surprise. It was predicted by some since 1974. It wasn't only psychiatrists who saw the wreckage of participation in cults, but police and coroners also saw the results. He provided an in-depth analysis of the murders of Ross Cochran, 17, who was killed in a satanic ritual in 1973 in Daytona Beach. That same year, it was noted that after Herbert Mullins and Kemper, both serial killers, had been arrested for multiple slayings in California, the authorities still had unsolved killings discovered in January and February. It involved 2 female co-eds from UC Santa Cruz and 2 from Cabrillo College at Aptos. They were ritually beheaded by a California cult, and their bodies were left on a deserted beach near Highway 101. A third was dismembered. Dr. Patterson presented cases of individuals who had been psychologically disturbed by dabbling in the occult. All the cases dated before 1965. He said the reason for this precaution was that he didn't want to be sued or killed. He described where a man wrote a book about Manson and other California cults, including OTO, which was founded by Aleister Crowley. The unnamed author disappeared, never to be seen again. Another example he gave was an acquaintance who was investigating satanic cult activity in Boston. The person disappeared and was found in Florida, decomposing inside the trunk of an abandoned car. In 2025, an article was written surrounding the mystery of why Joan Didion abandoned her book about the Manson family and the murders at Cielo Drive. Quote, luckily for the other writers immersed in the Manson world, some of whom were buying deadbolts for their doors, Didion's book with Kasabian did not ultimately come to fruition. As I've researched my own book in progress about coverage of the Manson saga, I've been flummoxed by the reasons behind Didion's apparent abandonment of the book, which had commanded a substantial monetary advance and received its own wave of media attention. What journalist would give up that sort of coveted exclusive? When others questioned Didion throughout the 1970s about the project's fate, she often gave vague responses. Members of the Manson family were reportedly smug that she had walked away, convinced that their intimidation efforts against other journalists may have done the trick with her too. End quote. Dr. Patterson clarified that even in the Meriden area where he lived, there were satanic groups and persons who believed they were possessed. Caution, he advised, should be practiced if an individual decided to join a secret organization. Cults and Satanism were dangerous, and potential members sometimes didn't know the entire truth about who and what they were getting involved with. His book was compiled from 3,200 pages of notes and newspaper clippings gathered from 1956 to 1965. To gain a modern perspective, he contacted persons currently involved in occult practices. This resulted in 900 hours worth of taped interviews. The next hurdle was getting the book printed. According to Dr. Patterson, there were regular setbacks that one encounters while publishing a book. But then he described where, quote, tape recorders refused to run. 3 typists quit, and one went into an inpatient treatment for a problem that was related to the material she was typing, end quote. Expensive copy setting machines that had cost $6,500 each broke down, all 3 of them. At the completion of the project, he claimed he was left with a sickness of the soul, and after this avoided cases involving occult-related problems. He told the audience, quote, it makes me sick. It makes me sick to be talking to you about it right now. I couldn't even read a newspaper for a while afterward because they were littered with accounts of this sort of thing. It was a kind of depression, physical and emotional, although my mind seemed to be working properly. It was sort of a taste of evil that removed you slightly from the world. It was like a layer of clouds that always between me and the sunshine. There is evil that goes beyond the control of men. It sets events in motion that go beyond them. When it goes beyond anything man can control, they are engulfed or sickened by it. End quote. The year before Dr. Patterson made his presentation, more than 900 adults and children ended their lives. In November 1978, members of the People's Temple in Guyana were part of a ritual suicide at the cult's jungle commune. Reverend Jim Jones was the one who orchestrated the mass deaths and also the ambush and slaughter of U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan and 4 Americans that accompanied him. Death was delivered by drinking a cyanide potion, and parents killed their own children. Jones was found shot to death, a likely but not proven suicide. Even today, the question remains how many took the drink voluntarily or were forced by armed guards. Before ending up in Guyana in June 1977, Jones started his cult in Indiana, then moved to San Francisco. He forced donations from his members and beat them for minor transgressions. He raped both male and female followers. At the peak of the temple's activities in California, Jones claimed he had a following of 20,000. He advertised the church as a Christian movement employing moral force to deal with man-made problems, but the main message embedded in his diatribes was anti-establishment. Previous to the ambush of Leo Ryan, Previous to the ambush, Leo Ryan met with Jones and interviewed many of his followers. Not surprisingly, some families and several individuals asked to leave with Ryan, while others apparently left on foot on their own. Jones was not happy. There were too many people to fit into one plane, but Ryan feared for anyone left behind, so he waited for a second plane to arrive. As Ryan's plane was taking off, a dump truck from Jonestown came on the scene, which included several armed men. They opened fire on one plane. A cultist named Larry Layton on board the other plane pulled out a gun and began shooting. Stephen Katsarsis of Ukiah, who had accompanied Ryan since his daughter Maria was living at the temple, escaped. He was at a hotel in Georgetown with 9 others who had traveled to Guyana with a delegation. A pilot was also able to escape. He described where he was fired upon, and this is when Ryan was mortally wounded. Layton, the only member of the People's Temple tried in the U.S. for criminal acts at Jonestown, was ultimately extradited, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. Perhaps what Dr. Patterson had observed in some cases was the effects of demonic possession. These inmates ended up inside an asylum, hopefully before they committed horrible acts. However, in the case of the People's Temple, their leader fled to another country. It is undeniable that evil orchestrated so much death and destruction using Jim Jones and some of his followers as vehicles. So, I found this really interesting because remember, around the time of the 1970s is when uh, The Exorcist, The Omen, the movies, which is a series of them, Rosemary's Baby, all these horror movies turned really dark. And basically, what he's describing is nobody wanted to publish his materials because it's going to scare the occultist or the people that might get involved with it. You know, like no, that's and remember he's not making a fictionalized or anything. His credibility, if he's writing these books, these case books, which apparently is going to be 10, the first one will be Possessions, coming from a doctor of psychiatry who had been for at least a couple of decades treating people. In other words, there was depth. And again, this is not fiction. This was true life. He's drawing on his notes, and he even in other words, this if this guy put out that book, there was nobody's going to say, "Well, I think you exaggerate." No, no, no. They didn't want to. They didn't want to publish the truth of what getting involved in these cults and in organizations or witchcraft or cults, especially because maybe people that were teeter tottering on mental illness, psh, there they go. And but besides that, the feeling that you get is that he felt like there was something supernatural involved in it. And I think even when he's describing that, he's putting his paperwork together for this book that he had the three women transcribists and one ends up. I think that when he was compiling it, all these notes, it's like you really don't pay attention to it. You know, it's gradually over years, and maybe you put that case away and you go, you know what, I'm gonna use this down the road. But then I think when he sat there along with the lady or whoever was assisting him and actually looked at this stuff and listened to maybe some of the like it got sick and there was like something that it did, as far as like being in listening to that over and over, different versions of it, in other words. So I found this very interesting. And by the way, if you try to find copies of his book, it can't be found anywhere. None. El Zero, El Zippo. And I'm not talking about out of print. You cannot find it. So there you go. Very, very interesting. Very mysterious. All right. Now, and by the way, this was, I believe his first attempt was to even get it published out of I think a publishing house out of California. Everybody thinks California is real like open about this stuff. Like so, it goes to show you. I mean, he it, when you read more of it, it sounds like when you go like from publishing house to publishing house to publishing house, and I don't know if the word got out. Like no, don't I don't know. It's a weird story and of course he's passed away by now. But anyway, next story also out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories is titled Deadly Superstitions. All right. Now, many people believe the practice of human sacrifice was found only in ancient and superstitious civilizations. However, this belief is not exactly accurate. The custom of ritually sacrificing humans is described as controversial when in reality it's quite bloodthirsty. In 1989, Patrick Tierney released his book, The Highest Altar, where he detailed the history of human sacrifice seen through the lenses of the belief system of different cultures. In 1954, a well preserved Incan child, estimated to be 8 years old, was found on Cerro El Plomo near Santiago, Chile. Examination found the child was killed 500 years before and became known as the Boy of El Plomo. The conditions where he was buried in a 3 foot deep pit assured his excellent preservation. It was determined he was a victim of ritual child sacrifice. The cause of death was suffocation due to being buried alive. There was vomit on his lips and clothing indicating he might have been drugged so he would not fight being covered with dirt. He also defecated on himself. His clothing, jewelry, and grave goods indicated he held an elevated social status. There were several balls made from animal intestines containing human hair, fingernail clippings, and teeth. These items were connected to the appeasement of mountain deities to avert natural disasters. Rodrigo Hernandez Príncipe was a 17th century Spanish chronicler in the Andes who documented local practices, including the sacrifice of a young girl and the identification of a sacred structure called an ilahausi, or House of the Sacred Stone. His writings provide historical accounts of indigenous traditions and locations in the region. This ceremony involving ritual human sacrifice is known as capacocha, and children are the ones killed. It's estimated there may be hundreds of Inca children that were left in icy graves at the highest peaks. A quote written by Hernandez Príncipe referring to Capacocha described, quote, "They sent Gauri Paxa to Chile to be sacrificed and Mune Carhua to Titicaca." End quote. It's not certain if the child of El Cerro El Plomo is indeed Gauri Paxa. The ritual of Capacocha covered 4 regions for each direction, and each village would send 1 or 2 children between the ages of 3 and 15 to be sacrificed. The children traveled on what was known as the Royal Road or the Inca Road to the capital at Cusco. The children had to be free of defects, and Incan priests would receive them. They would preside over the sacrifice of animals and the symbolic marriage of boys and girls. The intended victims would spend some time in Cusco before being returned to their homes. The priest and a delegation would take the child in a straight line across difficult terrain to their village. The child would be given a full meal and chicha to make them drunk before being taken to where they were buried alive. Present day, about 115 Inca sites have been found at over 15,000 feet throughout the Andes, some as high as 23,000 feet. Many of these sacrifices are near trans-mountain roads, and a discovery of a young boy in Mount Agoncaca, no, Agoncawa in 1985 is close to a path which follows the present route of an international highway that links Argentina and Chile. A Spanish soldier who witnessed sacrifices in 1551 described that, quote, "Many boys and girls were sacrificed in pairs, being buried alive and well dressed and adorned, items that a married Indian would possess." End quote. Non-local material found with the children suggests they were turned over as tribute from across the Inca Empire. This indicates Capacocha served not only as a religious function, but reinforced social control and instilled fear of the Incas' authority. The public display of sacrifice, masked as appeasement of deities, served as social engineering of the populace to assure the loyalty of those conquered by the Inca. Tierney's research into human sacrifices found these practices had not been eliminated, only gone underground. The reasons for the rituals performed by priests and witches are for deification of the victim, appeasing gods and natural forces using human blood as payment, blood being the life force. He wrote, "Blood sacrifice is the oldest and most universal act of piety." During his research, mostly in Chile, Argentina, and Peru, Tierney spoke to practitioners of human sacrifice. Francisco Núñez de Pineda y Bascuñán, who was captured in 1629 by the Mapuche Indians, spent 7 months as their prisoner. In 1673, he wrote a chronicle of his experiences. In one instance, he described Machi as witches who cured with the aid of demons. Maria Luisa Namuncura Añel, a 45-year-old Mapuche Indian known as the sorceress at Lago Booty, worked among the Lafkenches, a community within the Mapuches. She had the sick brought to her for cure and performed exorcisms. Machihuana was also suspected of sacrificing Jose Luis Bainicure in 1960 in Puerto Saavedra, Chile, in a ritual known as Guillotin. This sacrifice occurred on June 5th after the 1960 earthquake and tsunami in May. The child's throat was slit, then he was dismembered while alive. His still beating heart was ripped out, and his intestines were thrown into the sea. In one version, his torso was staked on the beach, which the waves eventually claimed. In another version, it was cast into the sea from a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Chilevisión interviewed a Mapuche Indian who survived the earthquake event, and when asked why this specific child was chosen, he said that Jose Luis was an orphan. There is no mention made of the father, and his mother worked in Santiago in order to make some money. Jose's mother, Rosa Painacure Antonia Sao, left him in the care of her father, Juan Jose Panicure. The child's own grandfather handed him over to be sacrificed even when the child pleaded with him to be saved. Other machis were sacrificing animals that had survived the cataclysm, but the natives believed this would not be enough. The newspapers of the day described there was violent dancing and drinking of aguardiente before the ritual. The entire community was present when the child was killed. After the earthquake, Rosa returned to Coilefiu, Puerto Saavedra, and was told by her father the boy had been sacrificed to appease the gods of water. She went to the police, and her father, Marcos Cuminao, and Machi Juana Namuncura were arrested. Her testimony, as well as interviews and reports done as recently as 2023, persevered the story, the story despite the loss of official judicial records. It was rumored the judge who presided over the trial of the child's death feared the Machi, which is why the case was not handled as a murder. 5 members of the community were accused and arrested for the act. Only Machi Juana was found not guilty. The other four, including the boy's grandfather who had confessed to the crime, then recanted and served only 2 years. The judge ruled they, quote, acted without free will, driven by an irresistible natural force of ancestral tradition, end quote. In 1959, Alberto Medina and Francisco Reyes, anthropologists from the University of Chile, toured the Lafcuenche communities in the area of Lake Buri. At the time, the communities were considered very backward, and one of them wrote, quote, they did not know bread and only ate seaweed, fish, and shellfish, end quote. Many of them did not speak Spanish either. In a foreshadowing of the sacrifice of Jose Luis Panicure, the researchers in a public exhibition warned that if any unusual natural disaster took place, ancestral ceremonial customs still present in the memory of the inhabitants, including belief in human sacrifice, would emerge. When Medina and Reyes learned of the sacrifice, they returned to Puerto Saavedra and interviewed the detainees in a small jail cell where they were being held. Guminao told them he recalled a legend that said when there were great disasters, it was necessary to sacrifice a white and blonde girl. Medina interpreted this to be an albino boy, not necessarily a girl. Machihuana said, the blood of animals calms the spirit, but that afterward she had a vision that required human sacrifice, like in ancient times, and the entire community knows that. The anthropologist said the Machi did not show any emotion concerning her act, only that she planned to preach the need to sacrifice the child to please the gods after misfortune or natural disaster struck again. The grandfather, who only spoke Spanish, said, I loved my grandson very much. He was my most beloved grandson. How could I not love him if he was the one who took care of my cattle? I had raised a little money to send my daughter to Concepcion to work and improve her life. I was not there when they took the child. I don't know what happened. I loved him very much. I loved him very much. When asked who took his grandson, he said, Painan, the one who known as the one-eyed man, because his right eye was missing. Soon after, Painan was arrested for carrying out the ceremony out on La Mesa Hill on the seashore. Rosa Panicure stated she did not believe her father, and that he was the one who took the boy to La Mesa Hill. She was deceived so much so that she said, I couldn't talk to him. I had him in prison. I reported him. She said her pain would never be erased and that forgiveness would continue to be a forbidden word in her soul. I didn't forgive them. They all died of old age. Rosa never remarried or had other children. Patrick Tierney found that, like the sacrifice in 1960, children, young virgins, and others would be ritually killed to assure narco traffickers would get their drugs through, businessmen could make successful investment, and villagers would be protected from natural disasters. Where once the natives sacrificed to mountain gods, the belief had morphed into asking these gods to protect drug smuggling. He tracked down one of the most master killers known as Maximocoa, which was an alias, who was a wandering yatiri or shaman. His main patrons were the most superstitious of the drug bosses. Tierney found evidence that South American cocaine growers engaged in human sacrifice in order to exert social control over the coca growers, who were mostly literate and depending on drug money for sustenance. Tierney convinced Goa that he needed a sacrifice to lift the curse from a gold mine he owned. He recalled, quote, Maximo told me how he prepared victims for the sacrificial ceremony. He gets girls high with wine, cocaine, and pure alcohol. Then he prays to the mountain gods that the girl be taken on the condition that money, riches, and safety were guaranteed. End quote. He met Go on a mountaintop where he called off the ceremony, saying he'd been bought out by an American mining corporation at a large profit to himself. In 1965, Herminia Alave and her infant daughter was sacrificed in Peru near Lake Titicaca. The remains were dismembered and scattered among the lakeshore. Maximo Coa confessed to the sacrifice, claiming he wished to pay the devil in a bid for personal prosperity. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. However, he continued as a ritual killer through the 1980s, with at least 7 to 12 victims linked to him. In February 1990 issue of Omni magazine, which Tierney was a reporter for, it carried a quote from Maximo Coa. Quote, if a person comprehends, if he's really convinced, and has enough faith to carry out a human sacrifice, only then does good luck really come to him. Cars, houses, everything. End quote. The 74-year-old Aymara Indian recited the explanation without hesitation or remorse. He described cutting his victims' throats, filling a goblet with their blood, and presenting it to the patron of the sacrifice. He also offered it to his wife or girlfriend as well. He was proud of having taken so many lives in sacrificial ceremonies. In 2018, evidence was unearthed on Peru's northern coast that more than 140 children and 200 young llamas were sacrificed on a bluff just 1,000 feet from the Pacific Ocean. This took place around 1570 AD, when the Chimu Empire held sway over this stretch of the coastline. This area, known as Las Llamas, came to attention in 2011 when 42 children and 77 llamas were discovered. The remains emerged from nearby coastal dunes close to where a 3,500-year-old temple was being excavated. By the end of 2016, 140 children and 200 llamas were unearthed. The children, both boys and girls, had their faces smeared with red cinnabar pigment and their chests were cut open, most likely to take out their hearts. The juvenile llamas were treated the same. The children ranged in age from 5 to 14. The llamas were less than 18 months old. It appears they were all killed in a single event. Some of the children had cranial modification, indicating they were gathered from different areas conquered by the Chimu. By 2021, archaeologists had unearthed a total of 269 children, 466 llamas, and 3 adults. It is considered the largest mass sacrifice of children to date in the archaeological record. There was a cataclysmic event that perhaps has lived in people's memory for thousands of years. In ancient times, Chile's Atacama Desert was the scene of a powerful earthquake and tsunami that erased the populace along the coastline. Zapatero was an ancient community in northern Chile dating back 4,000 years. The populace built stone houses atop shell mounds that opened into patios. The dead were buried beneath the floor of the house. Geological evidence points to a conjoined disaster of an earthquake and tsunami. Testing of these uplifted chunks are dated to about 3,800 years ago, approximately 1800 BC. The disaster that struck the area was of epic proportions. The rupture stretched along the fault systems where the Nazca Plate slid under the South American Plate. The earthquake was estimated at a 9.5 megathrust that shoved parts of the coastline upward and triggered a tsunami almost a mile high along a stretch of the Chilean coast that extended across the Pacific and New Zealand. This event was comparable in magnitude to one that was recorded in Valdivia, Chile in 1960. The study suggests the possibility of another earthquake occurring once again off the coast of northern Chile, and the only thing that can be done is to prepare in order to reduce risk. The people who lived in this area had no choice but to abandon their homes. The effects of the earthquake, tsunami, and an arid desert at their back gave them no choice. It's unknown if this could explain skeletons and mummies found in the Atacama Desert that show evidence of a surge of extreme violence. The remains of 194 people were examined. They lived between 1000 BC and 600 AD, and the violence was directed at both men and women. It wasn't just death, but torture that was perpetrated against the victims. One woman appears to have been tortured. The skin on her face was stretched so much that her mouth was pulled high above its natural position. This was likely an intentional act occurring at the time of death when the skin was still fresh and causing deep agony. The Atacama Desert is the driest desert in the world outside Antarctica. Less than half an inch of rain falls there. However, people have lived here for approximately 12,000 years. However, when the tsunami destroyed lives and houses, even the largesse of the ocean could erase the memory of the devastation. Researchers examined remains of people discovered in 6 cemeteries in the Atacama's Azapa Valley. 194 adults, 21%, or 40 individuals, had trauma as a result of violence, or 50% had head trauma, but others were injured in both their head and body. Surprisingly, not all the trauma resulted in death. In over 50%, there were signs of healing, especially if the individual was younger. One woman had both a healed and unhealed trauma, indicating she had been attacked more than once. It's unknown if this violence came as a result for competition for farming land, food, and other resources. Were these slaves that were regularly beaten and attacked? One male had a projectile stone point embedded in his left lung. Others had been mutilated. One man appeared to have intentionally had his leg bones and toes on his left foot fractured. 69 were examined for their origins, and 26 were native to the Atacama Desert, but the rest were not. The woman with the mutilated face came from what is now southern Peru. So there you go. And it's very interesting because obviously, whether it's the Chimu or the Inca or whatever, they didn't only sacrifice anybody or children or anybody, even without a natural disaster. This was part of their civilization. But I guess when things got really um, bad, like a disaster, and usually when, like they say, like even when they did those capacochas, the ones that carried out these ceremonies were like special people's priests from Cusco, from like the capital, and these children would be brought like down the Inca road, and in other words, they were prepared because they were going to be sacrificed. When something goes as badly as it did, we're not talking about specialized priests. You had the local, I don't know what to call them, witch doctors or whatever they were, shamans. They were the ones doing the killing. And, for all the times that they've accused the conquistadors, the Spanish conquistadors, of exaggerating the stories that they wrote, the people that chronicle, like, of seeing all these sacrifices in Mesoamerica, it turns out that they were right, that they were saying the truth. People were saying, "Oh, they're trying to make the natives that live there look bad." And it's like, no, this was actually happening. And unfortunately, it seemed that even like in 1960, I mean, and now I think it's absolutely right. I think it's not as common, but I think it does has gone underground at some point, unfortunately. And even this one, and this thing where the Tyrion is describing where they're doing sacrifices to make sure drug smugglers get their drugs through. Of course they are, and it's true. They are superstitious, and to them, they really don't care if, oh, you mean I have to sacrifice a kid, or yeah, just make sure my drug gets through. All right, next story, also out of uh, Stranger Than Fiction stories. Now this story, it also has a flavor of, if you want to call, you could say, well, this is mental illness, but it also has a flavor of seduction by evil or the dark side, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, this is titled In Search of the Sun God. Leonard Carl Humphrey, 35, wanted to be more of an Indian than he was. According to Larry Wickham, a policeman who was once his business partner, he was maybe one-eighth Apache, but he often tried to pass himself off as full-blooded. He was very proud of his Indian blood. However, with Humphrey, his pride turned into an obsession, especially with an Apache sun god named Santos, which in Spanish translates to saint. Okay, this is September 29th, 1969. Leonard Carl Humphrey was a Korean War veteran and a former Lorain County sewer plant operator. He, along with his wife Laurel, 30, and their three children, were found shot to death on a single bed in their trailer in what police believed was a murder-suicide. A well-written, elaborate note was found in the trailer describing that the family was going to the land of Santos, the Apache sun god, because there was so much sin in the world. But by the positioning of the bodies, police determined that Laurel Humphrey shot each of her children with a 22 caliber rifle, shot her husband at the base of the skull, and then herself in the mouth. Leonard 8, Dawn 7, and Shane 6 were wearing their pajamas. The children knew what was going to happen and were looking forward to seeing Santos, police said, based on the information found at the crime scene. Humphrey was dressed only in jeans. The note also gave instructions for the funeral, and their burial clothes were laid out. They wanted a certain note to be buried in their wolf tooth necklaces. The crime was committed after a party in the trailer park where they lived. The crime was committed after a party in their trailer park where they lived broke up early on Monday morning. According to a Tucson police detective, 4 persons who attended the party witnessed the note in which Humphrey tried to explain the deaths. One detective said one girl said she signed it believing that Humphrey was serious and she thought it was beautiful. Mhm. The couple also left a will. When interviewed by the police, the witnesses said they didn't believe the couple would carry out the plan. One of them, Robert Shelton, 26, was the one who found the dead family the next day. The one-page letter, handwritten by Leonard Humphrey, was signed by both parents. They blamed the war in Vietnam and turmoil in the world for the deaths. It read, quote, "The clothes we wish to be buried in are in the back bedroom. Also, we wish to wear our wolf-tooth necklaces. We do what we wish to do. Do not wipe the dust off my boots, as it is the dust of the land I love. To many we may be fools for what we do, but remember it is you who will be wet in the rain, made cold by the winter's wind, and be baked when the sun is full in the summer. For us it is not, but the silence of the grave. For you there is more in the struggle to survive. For us there is but peace. I wonder who is really the fool." End quote. Humphrey ended the letter by claiming that everyone was doing their own thing and this was their thing. Prior to the murder-suicide, the last 4 years of Leonard Humphrey's life was full of hard drinking, love of animals, and immersion in Indian lore. Leonard Humphrey seemed to have a troubled past. His mother, Pearl Joyner Humphrey, filed for divorce from her husband Leonard, charging him with cruel and neglect only 3 years after their wedding. Leonard was only 2 years old. It seemed that the original divorce did not go through because in 1947 she filed for divorce again, also giving legal notice that she would not be responsible for any debts incurred other than by her. It seemed that her husband, Leonard C. Humphrey, was using the alias of Arthur L. Puntney and was living in Glendale, Georgia. In 1950, when Leonard was 16 years old, he was arrested along with 4 other boys for holding up a merchant in St. Petersburg, Florida. Humphrey, along with 2 others, were on parole from Ohio institutions. They used toy pistols and only netted 35 cents. However, they were sentenced to 18 months in the state prison for the robbery. The other 2 first-time offenders were given probation. According to Wickham, his one-time friend, he said that his wife was more tolerant and really interested in his passion for Indian ritual. In 1965, Humphrey and Wickham, who was also one-eighth Indian, became partners in the Diamond W Wildlife Reservation on Wickham's Route 511 farm in Elrea, Ohio. They taught each other the Cherokee and Apache languages, studied animals, and collected Indian artifacts. For showing, unexpectedly, Humphrey was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and he fell into depression and drank heavily. In 1966, he was bedridden and he left Elrea. He told Wickham he was heading west to trap animals for the wildlife preserve. With a rented 50-foot trailer, he hit the road. Besides his wife and children, he took with him 2 Siberian wolves, an albino raccoon, a rare ferret, a monkey, a Great Dane, and several reptiles. Wickham never heard from his partner again. The police said Humphrey would give out his occupation as self-employed herpetologist. The police said the children had attended at least four different schools since arriving in Arizona in 1966. This was due to the family moving often. The last school they attended was Nash Elementary School, which is located about a third of a mile from the mobile home park where they lived on West Laguna Street. Ironically, the park was named Pleasant Manor. Later, the researchers said all three children were excited and happy about their forthcoming trip to see Santos. The neighbors said the living room of the Humphreys trailer was decorated with stuffed lizards and snakes. There were also Indian masks with snakes and serpents coming out of its mouth. Several of the neighbors who called Humphrey Apache Carl thought he practiced a form of voodoo and that he at times made wishes and kissed an Indian mask. The week before the murders, the Humphreys were charged with 3 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Several neighbors said the couple were trying Several neighbors said the couple were trying to engage their children in a prostitution ring. Both parents were also facing trials on charges of aggravated assault stemming from an incident with a neighbor. Was What was the real motive for why these parents decided to end their lives and those of their children? Was it truly a belief in an Apache deity? Was it a combination of alcoholism, mental illness, and Humphrey's diagnosis of multiple sclerosis? Yet how does one explain that his wife agreed to killing their children and was the one to actually shoot all of them? Were these parents prostituting their children? The family was interred at Pima County Cemetery. There was no mention of any family members coming from Ohio or elsewhere to attend the funeral or take charge of their remains. I don't know. What do you think? And you want me to tell you one thing that also puzzles me, and I've heard this in other cases, that you could say, well, but it's, and there's, if you want to give it a supernatural flavor, 5 shots go off. All right, 5 shots, not one, five at night in a mobile home park. All right, this is not in the middle of the country where your next neighbor is maybe a quarter mile down the road. Nobody hears anything. Nobody hears anything. 5 shots, especially coming from the mobile home or the trailer of a guy that maybe a little while ago is telling his neighbors, "Oh yeah, we're gonna kill each other or kill our." This is the part that I find that difficult to believe. Okay, as far as and then the next morning the guy something weird, but yes, that thing about shots going off and nobody hearing it, supposedly, allegedly. But and there you go. What was it? You know, was this a shared mental illness? Remember, the wife who ends up killing everybody is described by his former best friend as, oh, she's not really interested in it. This is just, she's putting up with this on his part, like to humor him. But apparently he convinced her. He convinced her so much not only to kill herself but to kill her 3 children. And that thing of them prostituting their children. I mean, this thing is like there's there was so much more to this, and I don't know. But anyway, I thought this was a very interesting story because it does show where when you throw that mix of mental illness, maybe some alcoholism, and even 2 adults, like nobody there was said, "I'm going to save my kid," does something like this. Which again, I'm going to state, a woman does. Oh man. Anyway, let's go on to the next story. This is out of Mysterious Universe, and this is titled "Dark Tales of Cursed Lost Treasure." There's always been a certain allure to the idea of lost buried treasure. That could be riches beyond one's wildest dreams, just lying out somewhere in some wilderness or at the bottom of the sea, has been an idea that has proven to be irresistible for treasure hunters throughout the centuries. These treasures almost seem to beckon to us, taunting us, daring us to be found. Yet among these supposedly lost treasures, some are more dangerous than others. And here we will look at some that are surrounded by dark stories of death and curses. Cutting through the dusty eastern part of the rugged Santa Monica Mountains in the Hollywood Hills district, right there up against the sprawling megacity of Los Angeles, California, is a low mountain pass called the Cahuenga Pass, also sometimes called El Portozuelo, or the Little Doorway, which connects the Los Angeles Basin to the San Fernando Valley. the lowest pass through the Santa Monica Mountains. The Cahuenga Pass has a rather colorful history, the site of several battles in the 1800s between settlers and the forces of the Mexican appointed governor's men. And it is also the site of one of the most mysterious and fabled lost treasures of California history, which may be cursed by dark forces and which supposedly lies right there by the major metropolis of Los Angeles. The year 1864 was a tumultuous time for the area, with fighting going on south of the border and much unrest between Californian settlers and the Mexican appointed governors. Amid this volatile climate and simmering tensions, France had installed Archduke Maximilian of Austria and his wife Carlota as the Emperor and Empress of Mexico, which did not sit well at all with Benito Juarez, who was President of Mexico at the time, and to aid in his plans to forcefully challenge the monarchy rule and maintain democracy, he sent 4 agents on their way to San Francisco to buy weapons to help his cause. They carried between them an estimated $200,000 in gold, silver, and precious stones, which in today's dollars is like all of the money, and they traveled along what would become to be known as the Cahuenga Pass towards their destination. The story goes that at some point during their journey, one of the agents mysteriously died, raising suspicions that he had been assassinated by French spies, and when the bedraggled group finally reached San Francisco, they found it heavily infiltrated by the French to the point that they stayed away. The spooked agents supposedly decided to lie low in the hills of San Mateo, dividing the treasure into 6 portions and burying it in all different locations for safekeeping until the French threat could be assessed and dealt with. Satisfied that the treasure was safe, the agents went off to come up with some sort of plan, but what they didn't know was that they had not been alone out in those badlands. Unbeknownst to the Mexican agents, they had been observed from afar by a shepherd by the name of Diego Moreno, who moved in after they were gone to unearth the treasure to keep for himself and bring back to Mexico. The death that would follow this hoard of valuables began when the 3 agents returned to dig up the treasure they had sequestered away, only to find it gone. The already very suspicious men blamed each other for stealing the treasure for themselves, as after all, only they knew where they had hidden it. Things got heated and weapons were drawn, shots were fired, and only one of the agents would remain standing when the gun smoke cleared. In the meantime, Moreno was bringing his haul closer to Mexico, stopping off at a tavern along the Cahuenga Pass near Los Angeles along the way. It was at around this time that he was allegedly stopped from entering LA by a sinister and potent dream, in which he was warned that to bring the treasure to the city would mean certain death. This powerful premonition was apparently frightening enough that Morena decided to hide the treasure under an ash tree and continue into Los Angeles, planning to come back for it later. Not long after this, Moreno fell violently ill from a mysterious sickness and was tended to by a friend in Los Angeles named Jesus Martinez. It was all for naught, as Moreno would succumb to his illness soon after, but not before confiding to Martinez the location of the treasure. Intrigued, Martinez and his stepson, Jose Gumistindo Correa, decided to go looking for the treasure, not sure if it was even real or just the delusional ramblings of Moreno's sickened, fevered mind. It is said that they did locate the tree, but that as they began to dig into the earth, Martinez was struck by a heart attack and died there on the spot. This was enough to scare the very young Correa off, convincing him that perhaps the treasure was cursed and not meant to be found. He left it where it lay and returned to Los Angeles, not telling a single soul about the treasure or its secret location. In 1885, some of the treasure was apparently found by accident when a Basque shepherd stumbled across one of the 6 buckskin sacks containing jewels and coins. He was supposedly satisfied enough with his fortunate find that he did not dig any further to find the other 5 bags. But it would turn out that he was actually not fortunate in any way at all. While on his way back to Spain with his hoard, he had gone through great pains to sew it all within his clothing to keep anyone from stealing it. But unfortunately, this did nothing to help him when he fell overboard as they came within sight of shore, and he quickly sank and drowned, taking the treasure with him. The curse would continue in 1895 when the now fully grown Correa decided he wasn't scared of curses anymore. and went out to claim the stash. But before he could, he would die in a shootout with his own brother in law on the night before he was set to embark on his journey, taking the secret of its location to his grave with him. In the meantime, the last of the Mexican agents who had originally buried the treasure before it was stolen was killed in a bar fight in Tombstone, Arizona. By now, word was getting around that there was a treasure buried out there on Cahuenga Pass. And although no one really knew where it was except the dead Correa, there were nevertheless plenty of treasure hunters who were willing to try looking for it despite rumors of a curse. The most well known search for the lost Cahuenga Pass treasure was launched in 1939 when a mining expert named Henry Jones teamed up with Walter Combs, a mechanic from Bakersfield, and his uncle Ennis Combs to hunt the stash down once and for all. Armed with sophisticated metal detecting equipment, the team would claim to have found it lying about 15 feet underground, with the only problem being that it was directly under a parking lot near the Hollywood Bowl. They would eventually get permission to dig the lot up in exchange for a percentage of the score. But as they got closer to their goal, the Combs backed out of fear of the alleged curse, taking the fancy high-tech metal detector with them. Undeterred, Jones continued with some other partners, and the search culminated with them boring down into the earth as film crews and hundreds of curiosity seekers and newspaper reporters looked on. They dug down to the predicted 15 feet and found absolutely nothing. But they were convinced that something was definitely there, so they kept digging and digging and digging. This would go on for a full 24 days until an impassable boulder blocked their progress and forced them to admit defeat. The embarrassment and disappointment at the whole thing would send Jones into a suicidal depression, and he would kill himself not long after, another victim of the curse. There have been other attempts to find it all the way up into modern times, and none of them have found so much as a single coin of it, leading the Cahuenga Pass treasure to take on an almost mythical quality. Was it ever cursed? Did it ever exist at all? Whatever the answer may be, the Cahuenga treasure has turned into one of the most mysterious lost treasures in the California history and may still be out there waiting to be found. Our next story here begins in 1519 when the Aztec Empire of Mexico was at the height of its glory, having ruled over central Mexico since the early 15th century and composed of a triple alliance between three great and powerful city-states, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. In particular, the empire had seen a surge in power after coming under the rule of Montezuma II, the ninth Aztec emperor, whose aggressive expansionism had brought with it untold wealth and grandeur that had transformed the capital city of Tenochtitlan into a thriving, magnificent landscape of sprawling temples, palaces, plazas, and botanical gardens. It was the splendor that greeted the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortes and his small army after landing in Mexico in 1519. And unfortunately, this would be the beginning of the end for the once great Aztec civilization. When Cortes and his men arrived here, they did so to a grand welcome with Montezuma filled with curiosity about these outsiders, showering them with hospitality and presents, including gold and silver from his vast stocks of treasure. This would turn out to be a mistake because Cortes was not satisfied with just gifts but rather wanted it all. The details of what happened exactly are murky and mostly from Cortes's own writings, but according to him, Montezuma was taken hostage and the city was pillaged for its gold and silver, in the process massacring countless Aztec warriors. The Aztec population then rose up against these foreign guests, and the Spanish were overwhelmed and forced to barricade themselves within the palace with Montezuma as their bargaining chip. As the angry Aztecs amassed against them and their attempts to ransom off Montezuma failed, the Spanish realized that they needed to escape. They grabbed as much treasure as they could and made a run for it, but they were intercepted and nearly wiped out. At some point in the bloody chaos, Montezuma was killed either by the Spanish or, by some accounts, his own people who had felt betrayed by him welcoming the outsiders in. But whoever, but whatever the case may be, he is said to have laid a curse upon his stolen treasure. As the remaining Spanish fled for their lives, they dumped the untold riches they had taken to lighten their load, most of it into the waters of Lake Texcoco, surrounding the causeway to the city. Cortes would not forget about it and would return the following year with a much larger force that managed to kill the new emperor slaughter thousands, and begin the downfall of the Aztecs. But as for the real reason he had returned, that gold he had lost, it was nowhere to be found. This would begin the legend of Montezuma's cursed treasure, a mystery which has still not been solved to this day. The main idea is that the Aztecs had retrieved the gold and hidden it from the Spanish, but where exactly they took it is the center of the mystery. Although the exact location of Montezuma's treasure has been debated for centuries, one of the prominent theories is that it was taken north by the Aztecs towards what is now the United States, where it was buried and hidden somewhere in the American Southwest, after which the warriors sacrificed themselves to guard the treasure forevermore in spirit form, even in death. One of the prime candidates for this final resting place is the small, nondescript, dusty town of Kanab, Utah, a small farming community set in a vast expanse of remote red rock desert. In 1914, a prospector named Freddie Crystal arrived in Kanab with quite the wild story to tell. He claimed that he had been in Mexico where he had uncovered an array of Aztec maps and petroglyphs at a monastery set for demolition. These maps were supposedly from the time of Cortez. After much research, he had found that they bore striking resemblance to the terrain around Kanab. He believed that Montezuma's treasure was hidden in a cave around Kanab and that a set of mysterious petroglyphs would mark the spot. According to the story, Crystal would venture out into the desert in search of the fabled treasure, and after several years of looking, he finally supposedly found stairs carved into sandstone that led to the base of a cave that was sealed up with stone mortar and which bore the petroglyphs he sought. At the time his discovery made quite a stir, but when he was unable to dig out the cave, Crystal apparently vanished without a trace, taking his map with him and leaving the exact location a secret. According to the stories, he really did find Montezuma's cursed treasure out there in the desert of Kanab, and there have been plenty of people who have searched for it to this day. One of these was a man named Brant Child, whose family had owned the Three Lake Ranch for 30 years and who believed the fabled treasure was hidden there below the water's surface. Child believed that the Aztecs used a device called a water trap, which would have required them to dig 35 feet under the water and then build a tunnel that would lead inside a cavern next to the pond. This water trap would make sure that the tunnel would flood any time anyone tried to retrieve the treasures. But this didn't stop Child from trying. With a team of divers, he went down in search of it, and here is where some of the eerie hints of a curse would come into play. Apparently, the divers experienced a series of malfunctions and mishaps while looking in the lake, and when they supposedly found a tunnel on the bottom, they would claim that they had seen shadowy, ghostly figures and experienced an intense choking sensation that had caused them to give up the search. Child was going to drain the entire lake in his mad quest for the treasure, but would find that it was the habitat of a rare and endangered species of snail, and so was prohibited from doing so by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Child himself would then shortly after die in a freak accident, hitting a horse with his car. Misfortune would follow everyone who tried to search the lake, and Brandchild's son, Longchild, has said of it, quote, "My dad came to believe that there is a curse. I think there is too. If there are curses, this is cursed. Every time there's been an attempt, bad things would happen. As they are swimming back in there, all of a sudden the diver starts screaming, 'I'm being choked down. I'm seeing ghosts. I'm seeing ghosts. People have died. We had a well driller that died.' The well driller went home, came back the next day, and started drilling down with a 10-inch drill down the same hole. This guy was 45 years old. He went home that night and had a heart attack and died. 3 weeks later, his wife died. All of a sudden, a technician fell over on the ground and started throwing up. Finally decided he needed to go to the hospital. Once they got there, his heart stopped a couple of times. Every time we've tried to go after it, bad things happen. The stories go on and on." End quote. Child has even spoken of a shadowy Native American figure appeasing to warn him to give up his search. Spooky stuff, but talk of an ancient curse has not stopped people from continuing to try to search for the treasure. Forensic geologist Scott Walter began his own hunt for Montezuma's treasure in Kanab after receiving a mysterious map that apparently indicates that ancient Aztec territory possibly reached as far as Utah, as well as several clues that pointed to the Kanab area. He claims that he has found a cave with evidence of excavation, leading him to believe it could be the entrance to a complex tunnel system, possibly even including booby traps, but that the government won't let him enter the area. He has also looked into the Three Lakes property where he got permission from Child to send a robot to look at the bottom. He claims that he found what appears to be the entrance to a cave, but that mysterious malfunctions kept the robot from exploring further. Curse or just bad luck, who knows? Yet another who is searching for the mysterious treasure is third generation treasure hunter and amateur archaeologist Don Dillman, who, along with his family, has been searching for it for decades. He too believes that Aztec clues and maps point to Kanab as a final resting place of the treasure, and claims that his grandfather stumbled across the mystery of Montezuma's treasure while researching another lost artifact, and he says of it, quote, as fate would have it, one day in 1965, when they were helping a neighbor clean out her basement, they discovered a 1964 Life magazine that had an article in it about the Peralta stones. These stone tablets had been discovered in 1949, and some believe they were maps that led to the fabled Lost Dutchman's gold mine. Gold said to be hidden somewhere in Arizona in the 1900s by a man called Jacob Waltz. This article electrified my grandfather and uncle's interest, and they began researching these stone tablets. My grandfather strongly believed he was being called to crack the code of these ancient stones, and for the next 18 years he spent time each day researching, meditating, vision questing, and dreaming about deciphering them. After years of research, my grandfather dismissed the theory that the Peralta stones led to the lost Dutchman's treasure and instead believed they led to Montezuma's treasure. Legends of this possible treasure suggest that in the 1500s, riches from the Empire of Aztec, Emperor Montezuma II were either discarded by Spanish invaders as they were driven out by Aztecs or hidden somewhere in Mexico or the American Southwest by the Aztecs. My family believes this treasure would likely be made up of tons of gold and silver, jewels, emeralds, rubies, turquoise, and other precious stones, gold and ancient religious artifacts, and relics and ancient records. It was my grandfather's belief that the Peralta stones were actually created by two ancient Spanish explorers, Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca and Estevanico, survivors of a 1527 Spanish expedition to the Americas. End quote. His grandfather would extensively research the writings of Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca and Estevanico and concluded that they knew where the treasure was, but feared writing about it, and so came up with the Peralta stones as a sort of code. It was a code he would claim to have deciphered, after which he would launch an expedition to Kanab in 1982. He claims that what he found out there would be the basis of his family's subsequent obsession with finding the lost treasure of Montezuma, and he had explained it thus, quote, using only images of the stone maps as his guide, he unearthed Aztec ancient ruins and artifacts, including arrowheads, weapons, pottery bowls, fishing nets, llama hair tools, and even a large sacrificial altar of the kind the Aztecs would have used. Another amazing discovery was another stone tablet, one that looked similar to the Peralta stones. Unfortunately, the ranch owner in Kanab broke the agreement made with my grandfather and kept all of the artifacts. But we have all the photos from the dig and other discoveries made. My grandfather was heartbroken, but he spent the next several years researching and trying to decode the pictographs and petroglyphs on the stone tablet. My grandfather sadly passed away in 1992 and provided my uncles with all his research documents and audio tapes to all the locations he wanted us to investigate. I've been on close to 100 separate expeditions with family members over the past 43 years, and after my grandfather's death, my uncles and I made many trips a year to southern Utah investigating and searching for the specific items we were told to find by my grandfather. In 2007, my Uncle John passed away, and he gave all of my grandfather's research to my Uncle Paul. There's still so much research and data that my grandfather left for us to investigate. Currently, we have a deal in place with a new landowner on a property that my grandfather pinpointed as needing to be searched, and we're excited about what we may find. End quote. He has also made mention of the possible curse that looms over the treasure and seems to haunt those who would try and find it. He and his family have all had manners of strange and often dangerous experiences while continuing their search, and he has said of some of this quote, "Throughout the years, we have had all kinds of crazy things happen. We have experienced strange orbs of light appearing above us and appeared to form geometric shapes, and an object in the sky once appeared to follow us in the desert night. Divers who have worked with us have said they have experienced unexplained issues, including the air being turned off, feeling strangled, and hearing eerie screams over the communication systems. My Uncle Paul would always talk about what he called the curse of Montezuma's treasure. He believed that if anyone in the group researching for the treasure was greedy or their hearts were not pure, they would die." End quote. They have continued their search to this day, although it has evaded them as of yet. Is there possibly anything to all of this? Does a lost Aztec treasure still lie buried within this remote area of Utah? Or is this just legend and lore? Experts have estimated that Montezuma's treasure would be worth approximately $3 billion today. So is that not incentive enough for one to brave the wilds and the magical curse that supposedly surrounds it? Who knows? For now, it remains a strange mystery, an allure that will no doubt call more treasure hunters looking to delve into its possible secrets. What article would be complete without mention of cursed pirate treasure? There is perhaps no name in the world of pirates as infamous as that of the 17th century Scottish pirate Captain William Kidd, also known as Captain William Kidd or just Captain Kidd. Once a hunter of pirates who then went over to the dark side to become one himself, throughout the course of his career as a privateer, Kidd was known for his savagery and for the vast amounts of treasure he is said to have stolen from countless merchant vessels, which would eventually lead to his capture and execution in 1701. Yet before that, he was said to have hidden away large stashes of his loot all up and down the east coast of the United States, the Bahamas, and the Florida Keys. Indeed, Captain Kidd's buried treasures have become as famous as the man himself, and have spurred numerous searches for them over the centuries by both professionals and amateurs. A further field when some of this gold was found at Gardiner's Island, New York. However, many of the locations where the last Captain Kidd treasures are said to have been buried are supposedly haunted, cursed, or both. Perhaps one of the most well known and notorious of Captain Kidd's cursed treasure supposedly lies at Charles Island in the U.S. state of Connecticut, at Silver Sand State Park, and just offshore from the town of Milford. The island itself had a rather dark and mysterious reputation even before Kidd ever landed here. It is in appearance rather unassuming and nondescript, just a slash of uninhabited sandy rocks connected to the mainland by a sliver of a sandbar that fades and reappears with the tides, measuring just 14 acres in area, and where nesting flocks of birds lazily lounge about without any human interference. But although one might not think much of this place, it has the rather dark distinction of having been cursed more than once throughout its history. The first time begins with a local chief of the Paugussett tribe of Native Americans who, according to legend, was so upset by the invasion of white settlers that in 1639 he vehemently cursed the island to never accept the whites, to shun them, and cause their structures to disintegrate and blow away in the wind. Interestingly, the land is indeed rather too unstable for building permanent structures upon it, and has in fact never been inhabited for long despite failed efforts in the past. The curse was enough to keep most people away from the island for quite some time, but not everyone. In 1699, the legendary Scottish pirate Captain William Kidd stopped by these shores and supposedly offloaded a huge trove of stolen treasure here, supposedly cursing the treasure to bring misfortune and death upon anyone who would try to dig it up, before sailing off on his final voyage towards Boston, which would end with him captured and finally executed for his numerous crimes. It is unknown how much truth any of these sensational stories has, and no treasure has officially ever been found on this speck of land despite numerous efforts by treasure hunters to locate it. But there are certainly some wild tales about the treasure and the curses. One popular local piece of lore is that two treasure hunters actually managed to unearth a hoard of treasure on the island in 1850, but that as soon as they opened it, they were met with fierce blue fire shooting forth and were attacked by the intimidating presence of an immense flaming skeleton that bore down upon them from above. They managed to escape, but are said to have had their sanity subsequently degrade and corrode to the point that they spent the rest of their years locked away in an insane asylum. Another frightening account of the cursed treasure of Charles Island was written of by the historian Charles M. Skinner. In 1896, he wrote, quote, Charles Island near Milford, Connecticut, was dug into one night by a company from that town that had learned of Kidd's visit to it. And what could Kidd be doing ashore unless he was burying money? The lid of an iron chest had been uncovered when the figure of a headless man came bounding out of the air, and the work was discontinued right then. The figure leaped into the pit that had been dug, and blue flames poured out of it. When the digger returned, their spades and picks were gone, and the ground was smooth. End quote. It is all a creepy tale, to be sure, and to this day the island is often mentioned as being haunted by the ghosts of natives and Captain Kidd himself. And whether any of this lore holds any truth or not, it is all spooky at the very least. Quite a few locations said to hold Kidd's hoard are actually rumored to have spirit guardians that will chase treasure seekers away, or worse. Another spot on Appledore and the Isles of Shoals in Maine is supposedly home to a very mean, glowing, pale-faced apparition with a red ring around his neck called Old Bob, who according to the tale was murdered by Captain Kidd in this spot specifically so that his ghost may perpetually act as a sentry against thieves and who will aggressively chase them away. Many of these ghosts are former crewmates of Kidd's, and in some cases there is more than one ghost guarding the treasure, as is the case with the treasure said to be hidden in Money Hill on Shark River, New Jersey. This particular treasure purportedly has no fewer than half a dozen spectral guardians, including ones in old-fashioned sailor's garb and others that appear as moldy skeletons and thought to be the spirit of Kidd's men. Other spectral treasure guardians of Kidd's treasures are more mysterious. One spot near the Piscataqua River, which defines the border between Maine and New Hampshire, is said to have a portion of the treasure which is guarded by a monster horse that will charge treasure hunters and then evaporate into thin air. The only way to avoid this is to read scripture from the Bible as one digs. Likewise, the alleged treasure at Lyons Rock near Lyme, Connecticut is said to also be guarded, this time by a demon that can also only be turned away by reading from the Bible. The treasure at Sandy Hook, New Jersey, is supposedly haunted by the ghost of a native woman who will angrily throw stones at trespassers. On the north shore of Liberty Island in New York Harbor is supposedly the resting place of a good amount of treasure, but something terrible seems to guard it. As Skinner writes, quote, a flat rock on the north shore of Liberty Island in New York Harbor was also thought to mark the place of this pervasive wealth of the pirates. As late as 1830, Sergeant Gibbs, one of the garrison on the island, tried to unearth it with the aid of a fortune teller and a recruit, but they had no sooner reached the box about 4 feet in length than a being with wings, horns, tail, and a breath, the latter palpable in blue flames, burst from the coffer. Gibbs fell unconscious into the water and narrowly escaped drowning, while his companions ran away, and the treasure may still be there for aught we know. End quote. Other places of Kidd's buried treasure have different sorts of legends surrounding them. Take the craggy, sweeping cliffs called Crow Nest on the Hudson River. Here, high upon the sheer rock surface, is a knob of rock, which is said to be a sort of plug to a cavern that leads to vast reserves of Kidd's treasure. It is located 200 feet up a steep, inaccessible cliff, and no one can even figure out how any treasure could have been hauled up there in the first place. Yet here it is said to be. The cliff face is said to be protected by a curse, which keeps anyone from reaching that plug of stone and sends them falling to their deaths. But if one were to manage to disgorge that rock, they supposedly will be greeted by a veritable fountain of gold coins and diamonds. As of yet, no one has managed to pry it loose, and it is unknown it is even a real gateway to treasure or merely a weird-looking rock. These are perhaps all just spooky legends surrounding the larger-than-life persona of Captain Kidd. Maybe they are just scary sailor stories, and there is nothing more to them than legend and myth. Yet people keep hunting for the fabled treasures of Captain Kidd, most often without success, but with that siren call of the promise of great wealth and lost history always drawing them in. There is no way to know if the stories of ghosts and curses orbiting these lost stashes of loot are real or not, but they do serve as historical oddities, add on eerie layer to the legacy of Captain Kidd, and do not seem to deter those who would find these treasure troves. Finally, we come to the remote badlands of the U.S. state of Arizona, just to the east of the Phoenix metropolitan area, where there lies a sun scorched, dried up, arid moonscape of twisted peaks and sprawling expanse of badlands called the Superstition Mountains, at one time called the Sierra de la Espuma by Spanish settlers. Here is a place of sprawling, rugged wilderness encompassing the Superstition Wilderness area and drawing in hikers, rock climbers, campers, and all manner of those looking to enjoy the natural splendor and outdoor activities on offer. Yet it is also a place of fabled mysteries, talk of dark curses, strange disappearances and deaths, high strangeness, and a secret treasure that it allegedly holds close to it, reluctant to ever give it up. The native Apache people of the area had already long held this as a rather sinister, scary place, even before outsiders came in to settle the land. They believed that the entrance to the underworld itself lay somewhere among these peaks, and that powerful spirits roamed the withered landscape. There were also strange stories among the Apache of a magnificent hidden cavern full of gold, said to have a vast treasure long buried within the mountains and protected by spirits, troll like beasts called Tuar Turns, and even their thunder god himself. According to these legends, this treasure was rarely seen by mortal eyes, at least not by anyone who lived to tell about it, but there are some tales of outsiders stumbling across it. One of the most prominent such tales is that of an affluent mining family from Mexico, the Peraltas, although some versions of the story say they were ranchers. The main thing is that they supposedly accidentally found this ancient Apache treasure somewhere in the mountains, but it was to spell their doom. According to the story, the Apaches quickly descended upon the family to ruthlessly slaughter all of them but one, left alive solely to tell the tale, not to mess with the lost mine to anyone who would listen. The Apache warriors who had massacred them are then said to have reburied the entrance to this enormous trove of gold, and to this day, the area where this is believed to have happened has been labeled the massacre grounds, and there are other place names that denote this grim history, such as Massacre Falls and others. The Peralta family would go on to be suspected of having left some evidence behind of their discovery in the form of a series of odd stones mysteriously etched with codes, pictograms, and cryptic messages written out in imperfect Latin, which are said to hold the key to finding their treasure, and which have been dubbed the Peralta stones. These stones were allegedly written up by the family shortly before their massacre and left behind by Apaches who did not know their true meaning, and so left them to rot away in the sun. They would be uncovered in the 1940s, but whether there is any truth to this story is anyone's guess. In later years, there is the story of the adventurous Spanish born Dr. Abraham Thorne, who was at the time living among the natives of the region and studying their medical practices. To this end, he lived for years among their ranks, learning their ways and tending to their sick and wounded. As a sort of reward for his generosity, he was apparently one day asked to put on a blindfold, after which he was told he would be led to the mythical lost cavern of gold. He was then led along a harsh, meandering route of an estimated 20 miles, after which they removed the blindfold, and he was met with a sight of a pile of gold sparkling in the sun near an entrance into the presumed lost mine. The Apaches told him he could grab as much of the gold as he could carry on his person, which he did before being led back out, never knowing the precise location, although he did mention a sharp peak of rock, which is thought to have perhaps been Weaver's Needle, a popular landmark in the area. Yet the mountain and their cursed treasure would get their most well-known mystery with the arrival of a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz, also known spelled Waltz, who was a gold prospector in the Phoenix Valley in the late 1800s. Waltz would claim to have been out prospecting when he had come across an unimaginably vast vein of gold out in the mountains, curiously supposedly near Weaver's Needle. He had allegedly made many forays to this mine, taking gold as he pleased and boasting of its discovery. but all who tried to follow him or learn his secret were said to get hopelessly lost or end up vanished or dead. He would take this secret location practically to his grave, but as he lay dying from a bout of pneumonia in 1891, he allegedly told all, laying out the secret location of the lost and cursed Apache treasure, giving details but of cryptic instructions on how to navigate the rough terrain to the entrance, as well as scrawling out a crude map to it all as he lay on his deathbed. How he knew all of this, no one knows. But one rumor has it that he learned the secret location of this massive stash of gold from the sole surviving Peralta family member. Waltz's caregiver, Julia Thomas, apparently listened to all of this but had no idea what to think of any of it. She was oblivious, baffled, and would apparently later sell the map of the now dead treasure hunter to parties unknown. The lost stash of gold, which had gone on to be rather oddly known as the Lost Dutchman's mine, has catapulted itself into one of the most intriguing, unsolved modern mystery there is, and the allure of its undiscovered riches has led many people to their deaths, with some estimates saying that over 600 people have mysteriously died or vanished during attempts to try and pry it from its ancient resting place. The story of the Lost Dutchman's mine will go on to become a persistent legend and obsession for many would-be treasure hunters over the years. Indeed, in the decades since Waltz made his mysterious proclamation of the mine public, there have been numerous earnest attempts to try and track it down, and these have the sinister habit of meeting rather gruesome ends. One of these was a veterinarian and treasure hunter named Adolf Ruth, who in 1931 made his way to these windswept wilds, armed with what he at the time claimed to be the actual original map to it. The 65-year-old Ruth, who was by all accounts absolutely and hopelessly obsessed with the location of the lost Dutchman's mine, ventured out into those badlands despite warnings against it and shortly after vanished without a trace. After an intensive search, Ruth's skull was found at the bottom of a remote ravine, sitting out there all alone in the unforgiving desert. A month later, the rest of the body was found about three-quarters of a mile away, with severely broken legs, and it was supposed that he had fallen, and then after his grievous injuries, died of starvation and the elements. As to why his head had been carried off, no one knows. Along with the body was found a mysterious note ensconced within a bottle, which said that he had broken his leg and needed help, but which also stated that he had managed to find the legendary Lost Dutchman's mine. There were other weird clues found about the body, such as the presence of two bullet holes to the skull from shots fired at point blank range, and it was speculated that he had perhaps been killed for secret knowledge or committed suicide. But there was no weapon found. Who killed him and then separated his head from his body remains unknown. The curse of the treasure would continue in the 1940s when a 62-year-old treasure hunter by the name of James A. Carvey journeyed into the Superstition Mountains and also ended up dead and with his head separated from his shoulders. In this case, the body was found first, with the rest of the body following a full 6 months later. No suspects or motive were ever found. In later years, in 1945, a would-be treasure hunter named Barry Storm would claim that as he had been out looking for the treasure, he had been fired upon by a mysterious sniper who he called Mr. X, who seemed to be guarding the area. The mysterious deaths and disappearances go on and on. In December of 1949, a man named James Kidd vanished without a trace in the area as well. Interestingly, it was found that he had amassed a small fortune in a short amount of time after starting his forays into the mountains, raising suspicions that he had found the lost mines. His body has never been found. In 1952, there was a man named Joseph Kelly who went out into the mountains to find the treasure and proceeded to vanish from the face of the earth. His body would later be found with a bullet hole to the head. Also in that year was the disappearance of two young boys, Ross Blay and Charles Harshbarger, whose bodies were never found. Mysterious bodies turned up in the Superstition Mountains all through the 1960s and 70s, with at least 5 people found dead with bullet holes to the skull, and with other bodies found minus the heads, which were never found. This would become a common theme in the Superstition Mountains, the presence of decapitated corpses, and indeed, this has happened to quite a few people who have dared to look for the lost Dutchman's mine throughout the decades. There have been other mysterious and ominous disappearances as well, including an abandoned campsite found in the mountains in 1958 complete with blood-soaked blankets, but no bodies and no suspect. There have been countless such deaths and disappearances in the region over the years, many of them with missing heads or gunshot wounds to the head. Most recently, in 2009, there was a would-be treasure hunter by the name of Jesse Kappen, a 35-year-old bellhop from Denver, who was in his free time, by all accounts, fascinated and obsessed with the legend of the Lost Dutchman's mine. At the time, he had ventured out into the Tonto National Forest in search of the legendary treasure, having looked for it on several occasions in the past and accumulating hundreds of books and hundreds of pages of research on the matter. He would vanish into thin air for his efforts. In 2012, his vehicle, wallet, cell phone, and backpack were located, but there has been no sign of the missing man. Then his body would finally be found wedged into a remote and inaccessible crevice, with the official cause of death a mystery. It was speculated that he had fallen or even jumped, but it's still a mystery, just another casualty of the futile search for the lost treasure. The man's campsite would be found to hold many books on the lost mines, and this would join a further three more mysterious deaths in 2010, 2011 in the same area, all of whom had been seeking the legendary Dutchman's mine. The Lost Dutchman's mine has gone on to become a pulp cultural legend, written of in countless books and appearing on numerous TV shows. There are still those who obsessively search for it and try to decode its secret, but no one has ever really managed to find it, to the point that many skeptics question whether it ever really existed at all. Yet there are still all of these mysterious disappearances and deaths, these enigmatic decapitated corpses and their bullet ridden heads. Is someone or something trying to keep this treasure hidden? Is this all just a spooky legend? Or is there something more to it? No one really knows, but the answers just may lie out there in the desolate reaches of those desert badlands. These stories are not only interesting in that they remain perplexing historical oddities, but also in that they supposedly still lie out there waiting to be found. Not only that, that talk of dark curses orbiting them seems to not do much to deter those who would be willing to try and hunt them down. The allure is just too great. The pull to locate these lost treasures too appealing to be deterred by talk of supernatural curses. Maybe someday someone will find them, but one does hope that they come out of it in one piece. Hmm. Oh. Yep. I believe it. I believe it. One of the most recent ones, as far as people becoming obsessed with it, was this Fenn's treasure, which there's an antiquities dealer, Fenn, who supposedly hid this in a box described as by him as having about $2 million worth of money, artifacts. Like he did a little bit of this and a little bit of that, which was according to him about worth $2 million, and he wrote about it in one of his books, like giving hints. I think about six people ended up dying looking for it. But my point being that anybody who thinks that this thing I'm looking for the lost treasures for like long ago, no, there's people that fall into, like they said, this obsession. And unfortunately, because they're looking for treasure, a lot of them go off by themselves. So when something happens to them, that they fall or trip or, something happens, there's nobody there to help them, right? And I believe one of the last ones that died with this thing of Fenn's treasure was a guy who went out with a friend of his. Bottom line, a mile away from their car. I guess they didn't realize just how close they were to their vehicle. They had run. They got early snowfall, something like that, and or they left and they really didn't take enough food or water with them. Bottom line, one guy died and his friend said, "Hey, drink your own urine. At least it'll keep us alive." And the guy that died said no, he refused to do it. And they think they were found the next day, and he had died of exposure of the snow, everything. And later on, it turned out they were like about a mile from where they had left their vehicles. But anyway, same thing. That the obsession that they describe, where people like do crazy stuff. Yes, yes, yes. I believe it. And we have recent examples of it, like I said. Because, by the way, when you look at these people in their regular lives, they have like, when I say they're very regular, like one was even a pastor of a church. I mean, these people have like regular jobs, normies, if you want to call them that have this one area of their lives, this obsession that they get for this finding this treasure. And what's really funny is this guy, Fenn, who hid it and wrote the wrote the clues, if you want to call him that, in his book. He was being told even from the first death, hey, you need to call this off, blah blah blah. And I mean, there was even forums of people putting. I mean, there was a bunch of people in on this thing. But he himself, on more than one occasion, says, "I always said that it was located in a place that would be easy for an 80-year-old to get to because he died when he was like, I think 90 or 91." And he hit it like 10 years before, but he specified. In other words, this is not in some type of inaccessible location where an 80-year-old could not get it. And eventually, it was found by somebody who, right after the last death, that some people think. I mean, there was even thoughts that had he really hidden the treasure, and then this he like basically said, "Yeah, this guy found it." I don't know, but bottom line, he had to stipulate that more than once because people were looking at these clues and thinking, "Oh, it's here, it's there," and they were just going off and falling off a cliff, falling into the Rio Grande, you name it. Yeah. So there you go. How's that batch for Neary News? I will be back soon with more of it. Believe me, I've got more in store for you. Till next time.